So we'll go ahead and get going. Hello, Assembly Member. How are you today?
Good. Good morning. Thank you. I'm
Good
doing well.
morning. Good, good. Hi, everyone. I'm Holly Martinez with the California State Parks Foundation. I'm the Director of Programs and Advocacy, and we are here celebrating our 18th annual Park Advocacy Day in a virtual way. Typically, we would be in your office and in many offices in the Capitol talking about the issues before us as it relates to state parks, but understanding that it's not business as usual. And so we really appreciate you joining us here today. The Assembly member, he is the the chair of the Assembly Water Committee on Parks and Wildlife. He has been our fierce advocate for parks for many years now, helping us get Prop 68 through the finish line and continuing in his own personal passion for parks in his own community and for his community members and family. So it's so incredibly important that we have the opportunity to have some FaceTime with you and talk to you about what we are starting to understand during what is a pretty challenging time here in California. So I'd love to just start and hear from you, Assembly Member, maybe introduce yourself a little bit, but also really help us understand what can we expect in the state legislature in the weeks to come.
Well, look, it's no secret that we're faced with some very challenging times, and not just dealing with this crisis related to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we're starting to see the impacts of this pandemic on the economic standing of the state. And for us, the next few weeks will be a really difficult challenge to be able to both balance our budget and continue to promote what is California's values and how we set priorities towards investing in people here in California, program services that mean a lot to all of us. And so we've got some really difficult decisions that are going to be before us in the coming weeks, and not to mention in the coming months and possibly even the next few years. But we're keeping an optimistic, mentality as it relates to the resources that we do have and how we align them with programs and services that will have good economic returns on those investments, putting people to work, and at the same time continuing to strive to meet our environmental climate change policies for the state of California. And I think that's where we have a tremendous amount of alignment when it comes to our state parks and our natural resources here in California.
Wonderful. We were just on a call earlier today with about 165 advocates across the state talking about parks, what they're seeing and experiencing, and sort of, coming together really for the first time as a group of advocates to understand how can we best use our voice for parks. Understanding that I actually am really quite overwhelmed with the sheer love and commitment and sort of desire people have to be outdoors today. We don't have to convince people anymore that parks matter. In fact, they are living it every day. And so, what advice and what sort of perspective do you have about how do we bring this love of parks into the conversations with folks such as yourself and other decision makers that parks are necessary and critical to people's lives? And how can we maybe strengthen, that argument of they're not just beautiful places, but they're critical to health and wellness?
Look, I think now more than ever, as you mentioned, our parks, our state parks, our neighborhood parks, our small pocket parks in the more dense communities are playing a vital role in giving people peace of mind and that mental therapy that everyone's looking for during these very challenging times. People want to go out and go for a walk. Others want to intensify the walk into some more rigorous exercising. Nevertheless, it is our parks, our open spaces that are allowing for people to relieve themselves from all of the tension and stress that we're hearing about, reading about, or for that matter, even dealing with directly. People who are unemployed, right? The bills are stacking up, the kids are not in school, the challenges of the distance learning aspect of it. We're seeing our parks in our backyard, in our community, being utilized more than ever. And that's a good thing. Of course, everyone is still exercising the physical distance and covering their face and whatnot, but it is good to see how beneficial these spaces are for our families today when we need them the most. And so from an advocacy standpoint, we just have to point to those very exact examples on how people are utilizing our spaces, our natural resources for purposes of mental health and public health and personal health and well-being of individuals. And so these types of conversations are critical, not just with me, but the other members of our committee that oversee the parks and wildlife public policy aspects of discussions, and extending that discussion to other friends and allies of the work that you all do and that we've been championing in our tenure here in the California legislature. We are excited to see that the Prop $68 were approved by the voters, and we're hoping to advocate strongly for those dollars to be included in the coming budgets so that we can refurbish and build new parks, as well as fund our state park system that we know also are a economic attractor for people in California, as well as outside folks visiting.
Right. No, we certainly can value and demonstrate how parks are an economic driver. And I know you've worked closely to understand, the recreation industry and all that tourism brings to California's economy, and state parks are critical to that. And I think one of the things we are thinking about is how do we make sure parks are ready and at a place, being closed for a while, volunteers haven't been able to go out there and preserve trails and natural habitats. Climate change is still happening regardless of a pandemic.
Yes,
So
right.
we have a lot of work to do to be at a place where our parks continue to be safe and healthy places for everyone, to experience. And so we know that you're authoring AB 3256, the climate bond. We'd love to hear a little bit more from you, what you're envisioning with this particular piece of policy, and how you see that as it relates to the state park system.
Absolutely. Last year, Assemblymember Mullen and I got in contact with one another with this idea of putting forward a climate resiliency bond. And we made a decision to work together and also include a handful of other colleagues in the State Assembly. Today, we have both a small work group and then a larger group of colleagues who have signed on to this idea. Myself, Mr. Mullen, Laura Friedman, and Mr. Bloom have been kind of the core group working on this climate resiliency bond, looking at investments up and down the state of California to build a more resilient environmental effort when it comes to sustaining some of the existing efforts where we are already investing, particularly in the natural resources area. So for example, a lot of discussion about fires over the last several years. How do we invest to prevent, right, and maintain some of these existing forests to prevent fires from happening and causing the type of damage that they have, where we've also seen tremendous loss of life. And we know that the climate has attributed significantly to those types of issues. If you live by the ocean, your concerns of sea level rising, and how do we increase investment into hardening the infrastructure in those areas, right? If you live in the Central Valley, or for that matter, in a district like ours, how do we use our natural resources and our farming practices to be able to build a much more sustainable system when it comes to our food systems, yet at the same time achieve some of our carbon decarbonization goals and objectives of the state? And of course, without a doubt, how do we invest into infrastructure, into our park system in urban and rural communities, not only from an equity standpoint for purposes of access, but also to, again, tie into our decarbonization objectives that we have. And so we were moving in that direction up until this pandemic hit us hard. And so where we're going with this now is we're going to pivot just a tiny bit and look at how our investments in a climate resiliency type of concept can lead to economic recovery and job creations within the context of our natural resources and these investments. And so that's where we're going with this. And we're excited to be able to present that bill this week in the Natural Resources Committee, but also share with folks where we think we need to go as it relates to tying all this in for purposes of economic recovery in the coming months, in the coming years, to get California back on track to being the 5th largest economy in the world, putting people to work, and doing so by passing public policy that is environmentally conscious and sensitive, but at the same time promoting all of the natural beauties that we have in California, meaning that we could do that, create jobs, and at the same time lower our carbon footprint here in California.
That's great. So with the bill being heard this week in committee and sort of business not being as usual in the Capitol, how can our advocates and others use their voice and, you know, express support or give input into this, not only just for this committee hearing, but how do you recommend that we meet this moment and continue to have a strong presence, you know, with this committee and with so many other members in the Capitol during this, you know, really small window of time it sounds like that you guys are going to have to, you know, hear bills and move things through. Any suggestions and advice there?
I'll start with, you know, the committee, right? That given that the hearing is tomorrow, you know, folks can go on the committee website and get the instructions on how they may be able to line up as they normally would physically and provide a me too of support or, you know, their input on how to move this public policy in a direction that meets the needs of the organizations that you represent. But certainly I would imagine that it would be a support effort for this particular hearing. From there, it's reaching out to the other members of the committee as well as a work group that we've established to be able to, again, facilitate a back and forth discussion in terms of ideas and suggestions that could be folded in to this effort. We are working closely with our colleagues in the Senate because we know that we have to work in conjunction with them in order to put this piece of policy together and try to put it before the voters in November. And we still have a governor to convince. We have a governor to convince that this approach could help us and lead us towards economic recovery, while at the same time meeting our climate change policies, goals and objectives of the state of California. Nevertheless, though, we are excited that the hearing is tomorrow. There'll be a lot of people calling in, I know, and I'm hoping that after this conversation, there'll be that many more people calling in and chiming in.
Great. Well, we will make sure to pass that along to all of our advocates and your great tips. You know, again, I really thank you as our advocate, as somebody who has truly lived, you know, the park's life in every way, from, you know, your upbringing to what you did in your community, being a local leader there, and your family today. And it really helps having your personal passion move forward, and now thinking about protecting these natural resources and how these natural resources can be critical to ensuring California thrives as we take on climate change and try to build a resilient California. So I really appreciate that. And certainly as you continue discussions with your colleagues in the Senate and the governor, we'd love to hear updates on how those go and how we can be activated to help support a strong position for representation of state parks, you know, in the bond measure and hopefully to the voters in November. So again, I really appreciate your time out of your very busy day. A big thanks to you and your team. And with that, I will go ahead and let you get back to your busy work schedule ahead. And thank you everybody for watching this video, and be sure to visit our website on taking action. Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.